Subtraction. On the board, we have 5 minus 1. To subtract, I'm going to write 5 lines to represent the number 5. You can write 5 lines or 5 circles. And the next step is to take away 1 line because it's 5 minus 1. So I'm going to cross out or take away 1 line. How many lines do we have left? 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 lines left. 5 minus 1 equals 4. Our next example is 9 minus 7, or 9 take away 7. The first step is to write 9 lines or 9 circles to represent the number 9. Next, we want to take away 7 lines or cross out 7 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many lines do we have left? 1, 2. There are 2 lines left. 9 minus 7 equals 2. Subtracting 2-digit numbers. On the board, we have 64 minus 23. When subtracting 2-digit numbers, always begin in the ones column. 4 minus 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. The next step is to move over to the next column, the tens column, and subtract. 6 minus 2 is 4. 41 is our answer. 64 minus 23 equals 41. On the board, we have 87 minus 57. We are subtracting 2-digit numbers. The first step, as always, is to begin in the ones column. 7 minus 7. What is 7 minus 7? Correct. 7 minus 7 is 0. Next, we're going to subtract in the tens column. 8 minus 5. What is 8 minus 5? Yes, 8 minus 5 is 3. Making 30 our answer. 87 minus 57 equals 30. Let's subtract. 782 minus 301. I'm going to rewrite this problem in a vertical format. And remember, the numbers must be written in the order that the problem was given. 782 has to go on top and 301 must go at the bottom. Let's begin subtracting in the ones column. 2 minus 1 is 1. 8 minus 0 is 8. And 7 minus 3 is 4. 782 minus 301 equals 481. On the board, we have 839 minus 413. In this example, we are subtracting a 3-digit number from another 3-digit number. When subtracting, always begin in the ones column and then move over to the next column, which is the tens column, and then move over to the last column, which is the hundreds column. So let's get started. Starting in the ones column, 9 minus 3 is 6. Now we're moving over to the tens column. 3 minus 1 is 2. And now we're moving over to the hundreds column. The hundreds column is the next column to subtract in. 8 minus 4 is 4, making our answer 426. 839 minus 413 equals 426. Borrowing with 2-digit numbers. On the board, we have 36 minus 29. To begin subtracting, let's start in the ones column, where we have 6 minus 9. We cannot subtract 9 from 6 because 9 is actually bigger than 6. So we must make 6 big enough to subtract 9. To do that, we have to first borrow. We're going to borrow 1 from the number in the next column. We're going to cross out 3, and 3 becomes 2 because we borrowed 1 from 3. And the 1 we borrowed goes here over the 6. And 6 is now 16. And we can subtract. 16 minus 9 is 7. Moving over to the tens column, let's subtract. We have 2 minus 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. Because 2 minus 2 is 0, we don't have to write 0 in our answer. The answer is 7. 36 minus 29 equals 7. On the board, we have 42 minus 15. To begin subtracting, we're going to start in the ones column, where we have 2 minus 5. We cannot subtract 5 from 2 because 5 is actually bigger than 2. So we must first borrow 1 from the number in the next column. To borrow 1, I'm going to cross out 4. And then 4 becomes 3. And the 3 goes here at the top. And the 1 we borrowed goes here over the 2. And we now have 12. Let's subtract. 12 minus 5 is how much? Correct. 7. Now moving over to the tens column, let's subtract. What is 3 minus 1? Yes, 3 minus 1 is 2. And our answer is 27. 42 minus 15 equals 27. Subtraction. In this example, I am subtracting and borrowing with 3-digit numbers. On the board, we have 365 minus 289. Let's begin subtracting in the ones column. 5 minus 9. I cannot subtract 9 from 5 because 9 is actually bigger than 5. So before I can subtract, I must borrow 1 from the number in the next column, the tens column. To borrow, I am going to cross out 6, and then 6 will become 5. And 5 goes here, over the 6. And the 1 I borrowed goes here, over the 5. 5 is now 15, and we can subtract. 15 minus 9 is 6. Now let's move over to the tens column to subtract. 5 minus 8. Again, I cannot subtract 8 from 5 because 8 is bigger than 5. In order to make 5 big enough to subtract 8, I must first borrow 1. To borrow, I'm going to cross out 3, and 3 becomes 2. And the 1 I borrowed goes here, over the 5. 5 is now 15. 15 minus 8 is 7. Now let's move to the hundreds column to subtract. 2 minus 2 is 0. Our answer is 76. 365 minus 289 is 76. On the board, we have 964 minus 278. Let's begin subtracting in the ones column. 4 minus 8. I cannot subtract 8 from 4 because 8 is bigger than 4. In order to subtract, I must first borrow 1 from the number in the next column. 6. To borrow 1, I'm going to cross out 6, and 6 becomes 5. And 5 will be written here over the 6. And the 1 we borrowed goes here over the 4. And 4 now becomes 14. Let's subtract. 14 minus 8 is 6. Moving to the next column, the tens column, let's subtract. 5 minus 7. We cannot subtract 7 from 5, so we must first borrow 1 from the next column, the hundreds column. I'm going to cross out 9, and 9 becomes 8. And the 1 I just borrowed goes here over the 5. And 5 is now 15, and we can subtract. 15 minus 7 is 8. Now let's move to the next column, the hundreds column. 8 minus 2. 8 minus 2 is 6. Our answer is 686. 964 minus 278 equals 686. Borrowing multiple times. In this example, I am going to cover two scenarios of when you would have to borrow multiple times in a subtraction problem. On the board, we have 144 minus 66. The first step is to begin in the ones column, 4 minus 6. We cannot subtract 6 from 4 because 6 is actually bigger than 4. Therefore, we must first borrow from the next number in the tens column. We're going to borrow 1 from the next number here in the tens column. To borrow, I'm going to cross out 4 because I am borrowing 1. So we're going to borrow 1 by crossing out 4, and 4 becomes 3. And the 1 we just borrowed goes here over the 4. And now we can subtract because 4 is now 14. 14 minus 6 is 8. Let's continue. Next, we have 3 minus 6. 3 cannot take away 6 because 6 is actually bigger than 3. So we must first make 3 big enough to subtract 6. Therefore, we have to borrow 1 from the next number in the hundreds column. First, we're going to cross out 1, and 1 becomes 0. And the 1 we just borrowed goes here over the 3. And now we have 13. And we can subtract 13 minus 6. 13 minus 6 is 7. And we're done. Our answer is 78. 144 minus 66 equals 78. Our next example is 513 minus 48. Let's begin subtracting in the ones column. 3 minus 8. 3 is not big enough to subtract 8 because 8 is actually bigger than 3. In order to make 3 big enough to subtract 8, we must first borrow 1 from the number in the tens column. Let's borrow. To borrow 1, I'm going to cross out 1 in the tens column, and that 1 becomes 0 because we just borrowed 1. And the 1 we borrowed goes here over the 3. And now 3 is big enough to subtract 8 because 3 is now 13. 13 minus 8 is 5. In the next column, let's subtract. We have 0 minus 4. We cannot subtract 4 from 0. So in order to make 0 big enough to subtract, we have to first borrow 1 from the number in the next column, the hundreds column. So we're going to borrow 1 from 5. We must cross out 5 because we're going to borrow 1. and 5 will become 4. And the 1 we just borrowed goes here over the 0. Now we can subtract. We now have 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. In the next column, we have 4 minus nothing. 4 minus nothing is 4. Our answer is 465. 513 minus 48 equals 465. Borrowing with zeros. Our first example is 1004 minus 296. In this example, we are going to borrow 3 times. Let's begin subtracting in the ones column. We have 4 minus 6. We cannot subtract 6 from 4 because 6 is actually bigger than 4. Therefore, we must borrow 1 from the number in the next column, the tens column. But notice that the number in the tens column is 0. We cannot borrow 1 from 0. Because 0 is less than 1. Therefore, we must go to the number in the next column, the hundreds column, to borrow 1. But unfortunately, the number in the hundreds column is also a 0. So we'll move over to the number in the next column, the thousands column. In the thousands column, we have a 1, and we can borrow from 1. To borrow 1, I'm going to cross out the 1. And because we borrowed 1, we are left with 0. And the 0 goes here at the top. And the 1 we just borrowed goes here over the 0. And that will now give us 10. Because we now have 10, we can borrow from 10. We're going to cross out 10. And 10 will become 9 because we just borrowed 1. If you notice, we're making our way back to the ones column. Now the 1 we just borrowed goes here over the 0. And we now have 10. We can borrow from 10. We're going to cross out 10. And then 10 will become 9. And the 1 we just borrowed goes over the 4. Which means that 4 is now 14. And now we're ready to subtract. 14 minus 6 is 8. In the tens column, 9 minus 9 is 0. Moving over to the hundreds column, we have 9 minus 2. 9 minus 2 is 7. There is nothing to subtract in the thousands column. We have 708. 1004 minus 296 equals 708. Our next example is 5,000 minus 2,752. Because this problem was written in a horizontal format, the first step is to rewrite this problem in a vertical format, making sure that the second number is written at the bottom. And now we're ready to begin. Let's start subtracting in the ones column. We have 0 minus 2. We cannot subtract 2 from 0. Therefore, we must first borrow 1 from the number in the next column over, the tens column. But notice that that number is 0. We cannot borrow 1 from that number. So we have to move over to the number in the next column, the hundreds column. But that number in the hundreds column is also 0. So we must continue to the left, moving over to the next number in the thousands column. We have 5. Now we can borrow. We can borrow 1 from 5. To borrow, I'm going to cross out 5, and 5 becomes 4. And the 1 we just borrowed goes over the 0 in the hundreds column. Now we're ready to borrow from 10. We're going to cross out 10, and 10 becomes 9. The number in the hundreds column is now a 9. And the 1 we just borrowed goes over the 0 in the tens column. That 0 is now 10. And now we can borrow from 10. We're going to cross out 10, and 10 becomes 9. And the 1 we just borrowed goes over the 0. 0 is now 10. And now we're ready to subtract in the ones column. 10 minus 2 is 8. 9 minus 5 is 4. 9 minus 7 is 2. 4 minus 2 is 2. We have 2,248. 5,000 minus 2,752 equals 2,248. And that was our last example. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more helpful math tutorials. Thank you guys.